Rapunzel. There were once a man and a woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length it appeared that God was about to grant their desire. Through the small rear window, they could see a splendid garden that was filled with beautiful flowers and herbs. A high wall surrounded the garden, and no one dared enter because it belonged to a sorceress. One day, the woman saw a bed planted with Rapunzel. It looked so fresh and green that she longed for some. This desire increased with every day, and not knowing how to get any, she became miserably ill. Her husband was frightened and asked her,
"What ails you, dear wife?"
"Oh," she answered, "if I do not get some Rapunzel from the garden behind our house, I shall die." The man who loved her dearly thought,
"Before you let your wife die, you must get her some of that Rapunzel, whatever the cost."
So, just as it was getting dark, he climbed over the high wall into the garden and took Rapunzel to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it and ate it greedily. It tasted so very good that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If she were to have any peace, the man would have to climb once again. Therefore, in the gloom of evening, he let himself down. But when he had climbed over the wall, he saw the sorceress standing before him. "How can you dare to climb into my garden and steal my Rapunzel? You will pay for this,"
"Let mercy take the place of justice,"
answered he.
"I only made it out of necessity. My wife felt such a longing for Rapunzel that she would have died if she did not get some."
"If things are as you say, I will allow you to go on, but under one condition. You must give me the child that your wife will bring to the world." In his fear, the man agreed to everything. When the woman gave birth, the sorceress appeared, named the girl Rapunzel, and took her away. Rapunzel became the most beautiful child under the sun, so the fairy locked her in a tower that had neither stairs nor door, but near the top was a little window. When the sorceress wanted to enter, she called out, "Rapunzel! Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel had splendid long hair, and when she heard the voice, she let her hair fall, and the sorceress climbed up it. A few years later, a prince was riding through the forest. Nearby the tower, he heard a song and stopped to listen. It was Rapunzel, who was singing with her sweet voice. He rode home, but the song had so touched his heart that he returned every day and listened to it. One time, as he was thus, he saw the sorceress approach and heard her say, "Rapunzel! Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Then Rapunzel let down her strands of hair, and the sorceress climbed up them to her.
"If that is the ladder into the tower, then I will try my luck."
And the next day he went to the tower and called out,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair."
The hair fell down, and the prince climbed up. At first Rapunzel was terribly frightened, but the prince began telling her that his heart had been so touched that he could have no peace until he had seen her in person. Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she would take him as her husband, she said yes. She said, "I would go with you gladly. Every time that you come, bring a strand of silk from which I will weave a ladder. When it's finished, I'll climb down and you can take me away." One day Rapunzel said to the sorceress, "Frog Gothel, tell me how it happens that you're so much heavier for me to draw up than the young prince." "You godless child," cried the sorceress. "What am I hearing from you? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her anger, she cut off Rapunzel's beautiful tresses and took Rapunzel into the wilderness. Then the fairy tied the cut-off hair to the hook at the top of the tower, and when the prince called out,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair,"
She let down the hair. The prince climbed up, but above, instead of Rapunzel, he found the sorceress, who peered at him with evil looks. "You have come for your mistress, darling," she cried scornfully, "but you will never see her again." The prince was beside himself with pain, and he leapt down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns pierced his eyes. Blind, he wandered for some years, finally happening into the wilderness where Rapunzel lived. He heard a voice and went toward it. Rapunzel knew him, fell on his back, and wept. 2 of her tears fell into his eyes, and they became clear once again. He led her into his kingdom, where he was received with joy, and for a long time they lived happily. Puss in Boots. There was a miller whose only inheritance to his 3 sons was his mill, his donkey, and his cat. The division was soon made. They hired neither a clerk nor an attorney, for they would have eaten up all the poor patrimony. The eldest took the mill, the second the donkey, and the youngest the cat. The poor young fellow was quite comfortless for having received so little.
"My brothers,"
he said,
"may make a handsome living by joining their shares together, but for my part, after I have eaten up my cat and made myself a muff from his skin, I must then die of hunger."
The cat, who heard all this, said to him with a grave and serious air, "Do not be so concerned, my good master. If you will but give me a bag and have a pair of boots made for me, that I may scamper through the dirt and the brambles, then you shall see that you are not so poorly off with me as you imagine." After receiving what he had asked for, the cat pulled on the boots and slung the bag about his neck. He went to a place where there was a great abundance of rabbits. He put his greens into his bag, then stretched himself out as if he were dead. A foolish rabbit jumped into his bag, and the master cat immediately closed the strings. Proud of his prey, he went with it to the palace and asked to speak with His Majesty. He was shown upstairs into the king's apartment, and making a low bow, said to him, "Sir, I have brought you a rabbit from my noble lord, Marquis de Carabas."
"Tell your master that I am very pleased with his gift,"
said the king. One day, when he knew that the king would be driving along the riverside with his daughter, he said to his master, "If you will follow my advice, your fortune is made. You just must bathe yourself in the river." The master did what the cat advised him to. While he was bathing, the king passed by, and the cat began to cry out, "Help! My Marquis de Carabas is going to be drowned!" At this noise, the king put his head out the coach window and found it was the cat who had brought him the rabbit. He commanded his guards to run immediately and assist. While they were drawing in the poor lord, the cat told the king that while his master was bathing, some rogues had stolen his clothes. In truth, the cunning cat had hidden the clothes under a large stone. The king commanded the officers to fetch one of his best suits for the de Carabas and asked the lord to join them on their drive. At that time, the cat ran on ahead. Meeting some countrymen who were mowing a meadow, he said to them, "My good fellows, if you do not tell the king that the meadow belongs to my lord Marquis de Carabas, you shall be chopped up like mincemeat." The king did not fail to ask the mowers whose meadow it was that they were mowing. "It belongs to my lord Marquis of Carabas," they answered all together, for the cat's threats had frightened them.
"You see, sir,"
said the Marquis,
"this is a meadow which never fails to yield a plentiful harvest every year."
The master cat came at last to a stately castle. the lord of which was an ogre, the richest that had ever been known. The cat had known who this ogre was and what he could do, asked to speak with him, saying he could not pass his castle without having the honor of paying his respects to him. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could do.
"I have heard," said the cat, "that you are able to change yourself into any kind of creature. You can transform yourself into a lion, an elephant, or the like."
"That is true,"
answered the ogre.
"and to convince you, I shall now become a lion."
The cat was so terrified that he leaped onto the roof. However, the ogre resumed his natural form and the cat came down.
"I have further been told," said the cat, "that you can also transform yourself into a rat or a mouse. But I can scarcely believe that. I think that would be quite impossible."
"Impossible,"
cried the ogre.
"You shall see."
He immediately changed himself into a mouse and began to run about the floor. As soon as the cat saw this, he fell upon him and ate him up. Meanwhile, the king, who saw this fine castle of the ogres as he passed, decided to go inside. The cat, who heard the noise of His Majesty's coach, ran out and said to the king,
"Your Majesty is welcome to the castle of my Lord Marquis de Carabas."
What? My lord Marquis,
cried the king.
does this castle also belong to you? Let us go inside, if you don't mind.
The Marquis gave his hand to the princess and followed the king. They passed into the spacious hall where they found a magnificent feast. His Majesty was perfectly charmed with the good qualities of Lord Marquis de Carabas, as was his daughter, who had fallen violently in love with him.
It will be your own fault, my lord Marquis, if you do not become my son-in-law,
said the king. The Marquis de Carabas, making several low bows, accepted the honor which His Majesty conferred upon him, and forthwith, that very same day, married the princess. The cat became a great lord and never again ran after mice, except for entertainment. Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, there was a prince who wanted to marry a princess, but she would have to be a real princess. He traveled all over the world to find one, but nowhere could he get what he wanted. There were plenty of princesses, but it was difficult to find out whether they were real ones. So he came home again and was very sad, for he would have liked very much to have a real princess. One evening, a terrible storm came on. There was thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in torrents. Suddenly, a knocking was heard at the town gate, and the old king himself went to open it. It was a princess who stood outside in front of the town gate. But good gracious, she was in a terrible state from the rain and the wind. The water streamed out of her hair and dirty clothes. It ran down into the toes of her shoes and out again at the heels. But she said that she was a real princess. Well, we shall soon see if that is true, thought the old queen. But she said nothing. She went into the bedroom, took all the bedclothes off the bedstead, and laid a pea on the bottom. Then she took 20 mattresses and piled them on top of the pea, and then 20 eider-down feather beds on top of the mattresses. This was where the princess was to sleep that night. In the morning she was asked how she had slept. "Oh, very badly," said she. "I have scarcely closed my eyes all night. Heaven only knows what was in that bed, but I was lying on something hard, so that I am black and blue all over my body. It's horrible." Now they knew that she was a real princess, and there was no question about it.
because only a real princess would have such sensitive and delicate skin. Only a real princess had felt the pea right through the 20 mattresses and the 20 eider-down feather beds. The prince rushed over to her side and knelt before her.
Please marry me and live here.
The princess looked shocked and said, "Yes, I will marry you." The next day, after the princess got a good night's sleep without a pea to disturb her, the prince and the princess were married, and they lived happily ever after. As for the pea, they put it in the Royal Museum, where it could still be seen if no one has stolen it. There, that is a true story. The end.
Cinderella.
Once upon a time, there was a beautiful girl named Cinderella who lived with her 2 stepsisters and stepmother. Cinderella's stepmother was extremely jealous of her beauty and made her do the hardest and most dreadful work in the house. Cinderella did the dishes, scrubbed the floor, and made the bed, while her stepsisters rested on fancy beds. Now, it so happened that the prince decided to give a ball, inviting all the young ladies to attend. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were delighted. They sent for the greatest designers in the kingdom to ensure that they looked their best. Cinderella offered to help them get ready for the ball. She always gave them the best advice. As she helped them, the eldest sister asked, "Cinderella, are you not going to the ball?" Cinderella sadly lowered her head and said, "No, you're only teasing me because I have nothing to wear. Perhaps I could borrow something?" "Lend our clothes to such a dirty cinder wench. We're not fools," they exclaimed. When the big day finally came, Cinderella accompanied her stepmother and stepsisters to the court and couldn't help but burst into tears as she watched them enter the ball. As she wept, Cinderella's fairy godmother appeared. "Cinderella, why are you crying? You wish to attend the ball, is that not so?" she asked. "Yes," cried Cinderella. The fairy godmother smiled and said, "Well, run into the garden and bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella immediately went to get the pumpkin. When she brought it, her godmother struck the pumpkin with her wand, instantly turning it into a coach. Next, she had Cinderella find some mice, and the godmother tapped them with her wand, turning them into 6 horses and a coachman. "Do you still think you're not able to attend the ball?" asked her godmother. "Yes, but should I go in these rags?" cried Cinderella. Godmother only touched her, and her rags turned into a white dress. To top it off, the godmother gave Cinderella a pair of glass slippers. "The spell only lasts until midnight, so promise you'll leave the ball before then," warned the godmother. Cinderella promised to return before midnight, thanked her again, and drove off to the ball. When Cinderella made her entrance, the dancing and the music stopped, as everyone turned to gaze at her beauty. No one recognized her. She was a complete mystery. The prince rushed up to greet her, led her to the most honorable seat by his side, and later took her out for a dance. Cinderella even made time to approach her stepsisters, who didn't recognize her. Cinderella was enjoying herself so much that she completely forgot the time. When the clock struck midnight, Cinderella was shocked and fled immediately, leaving one of her glass slippers behind in her haste. The prince ran to follow her, but only managed to pick up the glass slipper. Cinderella managed to get home before her 2 stepsisters stumbled into her room. "You stayed really late," cried Cinderella. "If you had been there, you would have seen the most beautiful princess," exclaimed the eldest sister. "She was so nice to us and had the undivided attention of the prince." "The prince would give anything to know who she was," said the youngest.
A few days later, the prince declared that he would marry the woman whose foot fit in the slipper. His soldiers began to try the slipper on all the princesses and duchesses in the court, but it was all in vain. Days later, it was brought to the two sisters, who tried with all their might to make the slipper fit. Cinderella, who saw this, politely asked to try it. When Cinderella's foot slid perfectly into the slipper, her sisters were astonished. Suddenly, the fairy appeared and waved her magic wand. In a flash, Cinderella appeared in a splendid dress, shining with youth and beauty. Cinderella was escorted to the prince, dressed as beautiful as she was at the ball. So a few days later, Cinderella married the prince. The end. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her. Her mother loved her so much, so there was nothing that she would not have given to the child. Once she gave her a little riding hood of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else. So she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother, having made some cakes, said to her, "Go, my dear, and see how your grandmother is doing. Take her a cake and this little pot of butter. But whatever you do, stay on the path because the forest is very dangerous." Little Red Riding Hood set out immediately to go to her grandmother, who lived in another village. When Little Red Riding Hood entered the woods, a wolf came up to her. He had a very great mind to eat her up, but he dared not because of some woodcutters working nearby in the forest. Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was and was not at all afraid of him.
Good day, Little Red Riding Hood,
said the wolf.
And where are you going?
Hello, she replied. I'm going to visit my grandmother, who lives on the other side of the forest. I'm going to take her some cakes, she said. The wolf knew the shortest way to the grandmother's house. He ran as fast as he could, taking the shortest path. As Little Red Riding Hood was going through the wood, she saw how the ground was covered with beautiful flowers. She thought, if I take a bouquet to grandmother, she'll be very pleased. And she ran off into the woods looking for flowers. Each time she picked one, she ran after another one, going further and further into the woods. It was not long before the wolf arrived at the old woman's house. He knocked at the door. Tap, tap. Who's there?
Your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood,
said the wolf in a little girl's voice. The good grandmother, who was in bed because of some illness, cried out, "Oh, come in, my dear. Open the door. It's not locked." The wolf opened the door and hurried inside. He went straight to the grandmother's bed and ate her up. Then he took her clothes, put them on, and put her cap on his head. He got into her bed and pulled the curtain shut, expecting Little Red Riding Hood, who came sometime afterwards and knocked at the door. Tap, tap.
Who's there?
Asked the wolf, imitating an old lady's voice. It's Little Red Riding Hood. I brought you some cakes and a little pot of butter that Mother made this morning.
Come in, my dear. Open the door. It's not locked,
said the wolf, and Little Red Riding Hood went in. Grandmother was lying there with her cap pulled down over her face and looking very strange. Oh, Grandmother, what big ears you have!
All the better to hear you with.
Oh, Grandmother, what big eyes you have!
All the better to see you with.
Oh, Grandmother, what big hands you have!
All the better to grab you with.
Oh, Grandmother, what a horribly big mouth you have!
All the better to eat you with.
And with that, he jumped out of bed, jumped on top of poor Little Red Riding Hood, and ate her up. As soon as the wolf had finished this tasty bite, he climbed back into bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loudly. A huntsman was just passing by. He thought it strange that the old woman was snoring so loudly, so he decided to take a look. He stepped inside, and in the bed, there lay the wolf.
He has eaten the grandmother, but perhaps she can still be saved. I won't shoot him,
thought the huntsman, so he took a pair of scissors and cut open his belly. He had only cut a few strokes when he saw the red cap shining through. He cut a little more, and the little girl jumped out and cried, "Oh, I was so frightened! It was so dark inside the wolf's body!" And then the grandmother came out alive as well. The three of them were happy. The huntsman took the wolf's pelt. The grandmother ate the cake and a little pot of butter that Little Red Riding Hood had brought. And the little girl thought to herself, "As long as I live, I'll never leave the path and run off into the woods by myself if Mother tells me not to." The end.
Don't forget to subscribe. Visit kidsacademy.com to play educational fun games and watch more videos.